The Real Ghostbusters. Memorable animated series based on the 1984 hit movie. Released in 1986, The Real Ghostbusters had a huge impact on those who grew up watching it, and became one of the most well-loved and most successful cartoons of the 1980s. Although the characters didn't look anything like their movie counterparts, I mean, what the hell happened to Egon? And why does Peter Venkman look like he's come off a GQ photo shoot? They still captured their personalities seen in the movie perfectly. As each episode, we would see the Ghostbusters take on new ghoulish foes, as they tried to figure out the mysteries of why the ghosts are here causing havoc. Not to mention that just like the movie, the TV show could also be pretty darn scary. Seriously, when you're a little kid, some of these episodes were really nightmare-inducing, and were definitely pushing the boundaries as to how much dark and mature material and content could be used in an animated TV show, which I think transcended The Real Ghostbusters from being just another children's cartoon to a show that adults could watch as well. Well, before we go further, let's cue that haunting and mysterious music that is always played in The Real Ghostbusters, in those moments where the Ghostbusters figure out the mysteries behind the ghosts in each episode. Ah, that's better. So today we are going to explore my favourite animated TV series of all time by looking into 10 things that you may not know about The Real Ghostbusters, as there are plenty of behind-the-scene tales and controversy surrounding this classic series. So let's check it out. Number 10. The Promo. As I've already mentioned, in the Real Ghostbusters cartoon, the characters didn't exactly match the characters seen in the movie. Ray was ginger, Winston lost his moustache, Peter was now a young pretty boy, and Egon looked like he was on his way to a disco. Seriously, he looks like Annie Lennox if she became a librarian. Not to mention the fact that they all had different coloured jumpsuits, going against their all beige look seen in the film. Well, before any actual episodes were released, this 4-minute promo was broadcast, obviously to get people excited for the upcoming animated series. But what's really interesting about this promo is that it bears more resemblance to the film than the actual series did. For a start, all the Ghostbusters were in the traditional beige look. Slimer looked more hideous and grotesque like he did in the movie, but the biggest similarity is Peter Venkman himself. He looks more like Bill Murray here, as he looks shorter, stockier, older, and has dark hair and a receding hairline. Number 9. Use of the word real. Ever noticed how the show is called The Real Ghostbusters and not just Ghostbusters like the movie? Well, this is because when The Real Ghostbusters came out, Filmation also released a cartoon called Ghostbusters. So not to get viewers confused as to which one of these cartoons was based on the movie, which is probably the reason why they would be watching a cartoon called Ghostbusters in the first place, it was decided to name the show The Real Ghostbusters, as in this is the legit article. The story behind this goes way back to 1974, when Filmation made a short-lived live-action TV series called Ghostbusters. And when Dan Aykroyd was making the Ghostbusters movie in 1984, he could only use the title Ghostbusters if he paid Filmation a fee, who owned the name thanks to their TV show. And when Filmation got wind that a Ghostbusters cartoon being based on the movie was in the works, Filmation approached Columbia Pictures to produce the cartoon. However, Columbia went with DiC Cartoons, who were big at the time thanks to the Inspector Gadget animated series. So Filmation, not wanting to be beaten, decided to make an animated series based off their live-action TV series. No doubt with the knowledge that kids would watch it because it was called Ghostbusters, relying on the popularity of the movie. So henceforth, in retaliation, DiC called the Ghostbusters cartoon based on the movie The Real Ghostbusters. Either way, say what you want to say about the Filmation Ghostbusters. I mean, it's not at all a bad cartoon or anything, but the real Ghostbusters was definitely the superior TV show out of the two. Number 8. Weird changes made to the series. When the real Ghostbusters came out, it was an instant smash hit with great viewing figures, thanks to its humour and generally creepy moments. For whatever reasons, in order to improve the show, several changes were made over the show's early years, which many agree took away the Ghostbusters' more daring edge and a dumbed down show. Firstly, the character Janine, who originally had a lot of sass and spunk, who was always ready to dish it back to the real Ghostbusters and their weird shenanigans. Well, the producers of the real Ghostbusters were told to make her more kind and motherly, along with changing her pointy glasses with round ones, as pointy glasses may have been too scary for the children watching at home. And yes, I am not kidding, this was a thing. They were worried about Janine's pointy glasses. So, in essence, the character lost her flair and became a boring shadow of her former self. Then there's Ray, who oddly was nearly written out of the show because he was deemed as being too insignificant. Once again, not kidding, this is frickin' Ray. But even though he stayed, like Janine, his character went through several physical changes, including a sudden weight change going from overweight to slim. And they even darkened his hair from orange to brown. Yeah, better not have any of those people with ginger hair on the show. And Winston, who was a fully developed character in the early days of the show, who contributed with ideas and intellect as much as the other characters, was reduced to just being the Ghostbusters driver, a decision that many of the crew found to frankly be racist. Because of course, making Janine's glasses round and Ray lose weight totally makes it a better show, right? Number 7. Creepy VHS intro. By the time the real Ghostbusters came out, home entertainment systems like VHS had become a thing, and the powers that be behind the real Ghostbusters really capitalised on that by releasing a string of real Ghostbusters VHS tapes, which featured several episodes from the popular TV show. However, one thing that many people who got the real Ghostbusters on VHS may remember was being traumatized by this weird, creepy intro, in which we see some kid walking around a strange garden, where he suddenly runs really fast. In fact, this kid is so fast, he starts to break the boundaries of reality as we know it, and leap out of our dimension into another state of consciousness, leaving a trail of silhouetted kids behind him. I mean, what Inception madness is this? Seriously, I don't know why this intro had such a profound effect on me, but it just did. It really freaked me out, and I can't explain why. But after doing research on the interwebs, it does seem that I'm not the only one who found this intro a little bit creepy. Number 6. Comic book. Yet, when the real Ghostbusters was in the height of its success and power, a comic book series was released by Now Comics, which furthers the adventures of the real Ghostbusters. I can remember reading these as a kid, and just like the cartoon itself, I thought it was funny with comical moments and characters, but could also be kind of freaky at times. I always loved this comic book cover, where we literally see the Ghostbusters pulling the front cover away to reveal plenty of ghosts and ghouls inside. Although there are some things that baffle me about this comic, like, why is Ray wearing pink? Yeah, Ray, looking pretty good there in that shade of pink. And what's up with Winston here? Who pissed in his sandwiches? He seriously looks pretty angry and like he's in no mood for any ghost shenanigans today. Number 5. Awesome figurines. One of my most fondest childhood memories of the real Ghostbusters is of course the awesome figurine lineup that follow it. At the start, we just got figurines of the 4 Ghostbusters in their traditional suits, along with a Mr. Stay Puft and Slimer figurine. It was all very standard. But then after that came along some of the most craziest and inventive figurines ever. Figurines that could literally change their facial expressions and have their hair fly off and their eyes pop out, which is something I had never seen before. So to me, they were actually pretty groundbreaking. Even the ghost figurines were awesome and could transform. Heck, the toy lineup even had a Volkswagen that transformed into a praying mantis. Because Lord knows, there just aren't enough Volkswagens that transform into praying mantises. Number 4. Winston auditioned for Winston. In the Real Ghostbusters, there were several talented voice actors on board to provide their voice talents for the show, including Lorenzo Music, who provided the voice of Peter Venkman. Music is probably most famous for providing the voice of Garfield in the animated TV series. And yes, of course, I know the irony being that Bill Murray would go on to provide the voice of Garfield in the movies, along with Frank Welker, who provided the voice for Ray and Slimer, who also provided his voice in many TV shows and movies, including Scooby-Doo and Gremlins. However, when the producers were casting voice actors, Ernie Hudson, who actually played Winston in the movie, auditioned for the role of Winston in the cartoon, only to be turned down for Arsenio Hall. Now don't get me wrong, Hall does a great job at Winston, but come on, how can you turn back the guy who actually played Winston? That's crazy! Bottom line is, if the guy who plays Winston wants to voice Winston, then just let him do it. I mean, how could you turn down Ernie Hudson? Also, as the series went on, Lorenzo Music, who provided the voice for Peter, was replaced by Dave Coulier, aka that weird mulleted guy from Full House. Unfortunately, he didn't have the charm of Music and made the character more obnoxious than likable. Number 3. Referencing the movie. Throughout the series, there are several references to the movie in which the animated series is based on. The most well known is an episode called Citizen Ghost, which acts as a direct sequel to the original movie, in which after doing battle with Gozer, the Ghostbusters return to the firehouse to discover that their suits are now contaminated with evil psychic energy, to which they must get new suits. This was a nice explanation as to why the Ghostbusters now have multicolored jumpsuits. However, their old suits become possessed, in which evil demonic Ghostbusters beings are formed. There is another episode called Take 2, where we learn that a movie is being made about the real Ghostbusters, which is in fact the original movie the cartoon is based on. Which is one hell of a paradox when you think about it. There was even an episode called Big Trouble with Little Slimer, which actually sees the return of Walter Peck. Yep, and he still has no dick. Number 2. There was a sequel to the series. The Real Ghostbusters may have wrapped up in 1991, but there was, however, something of a revival in 1997 with the release of a sequel series, The Extreme Ghostbusters. Because of course, in the 90s, everything had to be extreme. This time the show was produced by Fox Kids, and it's set several years after the events of the Real Ghostbusters, to which a now middle-aged Egon employs a new generation of Ghostbusters to go out and kick ectoplasmic ass. Now the idea of a new generation of Ghostbusters sound obnoxious, but it actually works here. I particularly like the Kylie Griffin character, who is like the goth chick in the group, and is definitely the smartest and bravest one. Yep, a female Ghostbuster long before the 2016 reboot. The series was actually really dark and handled really mature subject matter. It doesn't at all feel like a kid's show. In a weird way, it felt like the show was catering to teenagers who would have been small children when the Real Ghostbusters was being shown. I don't think the Extreme Ghostbusters gets anywhere near as much recognition as it deserves. Sadly, it only lasted 2 seasons, only to disappear, never to really be spoken of again. However, However, Extreme Ghostbusters did have something of a lasting impact on the Ghostbusters fandom, in that for years when a third entry was in the works, there were many stories and rumours about the third entry being about new young Ghostbusters recruits, which is pretty much the main story of Extreme Ghostbusters. Number 1. Slimer took over. It's a common complaint among fans of the show that the real Ghostbusters definitely got sillier as time went on, with the edge and severity and spooks of the earlier days being replaced by silly and slapstick. And nowhere is this more evident than the increasing use of the character Slimer. Slimer had been around since the start, but was something of a side character, which I was always glad about as I personally found the character annoying. But as the show went on, more and more focus was put on Slimer, with more episodes revolving around the green glob of talking ecto-goo, till it got to the stage where the whole show revolved around the annoying poltergeist. So much so that the show's name was changed to Slimer and the Real Ghostbusters. What a sad state the show had stooped to when the Ghostbusters had become secondary characters in their own show and had to take a step back for Slimer. There was even a bizarre, goofy Slimer TV show that was shown alongside the Real Ghostbusters, which was actually never shown here in Australia. But sadly, by 1991, the sequel Ghostbusters 2 had come and gone, and the Ghostbusters fame was now winding down. To put it bluntly, the Real Ghostbusters had fizzled out and the show ended. Naturally, an animated series can't last forever, and 5 years is an impressive run. But without a doubt, the over-reliance on Slimer in the later years may have sped up the process for the Real Ghostbusters' demise. Look, every show eventually has its jump the shark moment, and to me, the increase of Slimer was the jump the shark moment for the Real Ghostbusters. Anyway, that was my spooktacular look into the Real Ghostbusters. One of the greatest cartoons to come out in the 1980s. A cartoon which made me laugh, made me scared, and made me think. And also made me use my imagination. It was just basically an all-in-all fun and enjoyable show. Anyway, I'm Minty. The real Minty. See ya!